Welcome, everybody. I am really excited to be doing this presentation about a very difficult but very cool topic. So I am going to run through some logistics slide here in the first few slides. The first being, so we just have about 30 minutes to go through the content that I have. So that's not enough for discussing this concept of influencing in a work environment, right? However, though, this is part of the continuing education courses. It's a 7 hours or 1 day course that we deliver, and that information is in front of your screen here. If you need more information, that will come later. So if you find this topic or the conversation that we are having very interesting, you can go on and learn more. Everything, more templates and tools are in this course. Okay, that's the first logistical item. If we go to the next slide, this is just a notice, so we'll go past this slide. I want to give you a template alert. You know, when we teach this course as part of continuing education, we do have a lot of templates. But one template that I think most of the participants, and we've had more than 500 people take this course, have found useful, is this template that gives you an opportunity to actually plan a specific workplace influencing situation you're facing. So basically, this template can help you put everything that we have discussed in this session into practice. But and we don't want you don't have to attend that course that I told you. You can actually ask for this template and use some of the things that we covered today to complete it. But the goal is that you have one practical tool that you take with you after the end of the session. Okay, we can move to the next slide. At the end of this session, if there's anything you're going to remember, if you forget everything, don't forget this. So going back to that template, we have a 5-part formula that we say when you're thinking about influencing, you're working on a project and you want to influence someone or a group of people to provide value for the project that you're working on. Think about this 5-part formula. It includes 3 things, but 5 things in total. The first is a framework we're going to talk about called PAUSE. It's an acronym. The second is there are 3 factors that everyone needs to consider when we talk about influencing people at work. And we're going to talk about those a little bit in more detail. You know, first of all, there are certain variables that impact influencing situation at the work. What does that look like? We will call that the foundations of influence. The second is we talk about power. Power and authority is 2 concepts that every time we talk about influencing comes up. And people feel powerless in every situation. The question that I will ask you after this session is, are you really powerless? Or do you have power in that situation, but you are probably using a different power? Is that the case? And then the last, we're going to talk about the tactics that we are suggesting based on this framework. And the last piece is, how do you measure if you have successfully influenced someone or a group of people to follow a direction that you think creates value for you, them, and your organization? Okay, so don't forget the 5-part formula. We're going to walk you through that. If we go to the next slide, there's some key takeaways, and the next 2 slides are going to talk about it. One is there is a difference between influence and manipulation. This is something that we will talk about a lot here. One of the biggest issue or resistance that people feel, they say, but I feel like I am manipulating the person if I take into account these tactics. But at the end of this session, I hope you can confidently articulate the difference between influencing and manipulation and the associated behaviors that are sanctioned and non-sanctioned when we are involved in that activity. Okay, the biggest piece for me also is influence. When you successfully influence somebody, it is all about value creation. which means your actions and decisions are creating values for others, your organization, and of course yourself, because you might be the one leading the project. And there are different influencing styles, which means you have to tailor your influencing tactics and strategies or approach to those different influencing styles. If we go to the next slide, which will summarize what I'm trying to say. The first is always remember, if influencing doesn't work, because many times you will try to influence and it doesn't work. And then, sometimes we feel, oh my God, I tried my best and this didn't work. Realize these few things. First, the whole concept of influence and influencing, especially at the workplace, is really complex. There are many factors beyond our control. You don't have to feel sad, or you can feel sad, which is normal emotion to feel. However, realize that failure is really a learning opportunity, and sometimes it's all about trial and error. This is normal. You try something, it may not be what the person wants, it may not be what the person expects. It's also trying to try again and see that as an opportunity to tailor other strategies to fit the person's approach. And please, for mental health and wellness, avoid personalization. It's not all about you or I. Sometimes the resistance or lack of response may come from the fact that the person is dealing with a lot of stuff, especially after COVID. What we're finding is the workload is so much. People are busy, from personal stuff to work demands, that they are struggling. So I just want to plug that there, that to not make this become your self-worth. Sometimes people are dealing with so much, and this is not about you. From a prioritization level, you may not be able to influence them at that specific time, but maybe later down the road, they may come back to you from it, which brings us to the last point. Sometimes success is not always determined by the immediate outcome you're looking for. There are situations where, personally, I have tried to influence somebody and it didn't work at that time, but later they come back to me and say, hey, MacDonald, remember what you were telling me about 2 months ago or 2 years ago? What does that look like now? And you're like, oh my God, I can't remember. But you go back. That means influencing, sometimes we want immediate outcomes, but it may not be immediate. The outcomes may be you're building relationship that will work down the road. Okay, next slide. Now that we've gotten that logistics aspect out, the question for you, and I would like to see you respond to this as comments in the chat box. Think about someone who you know, and it could be at work or at home, or your social circles, who is really good at influencing. What specific behavior, actions, tactics, or approach do they use that makes them influence other people successfully? If you can type that in the chat, I'll just wait for a minute here to see some of the great things that are coming in the chat. You can see some, diplomatic. I like this one. This is one of my favorites for those of you who are introverts, good listener, because some people are like, oh, I'm an introvert, so it's such a difficulty for me to be able to influence effectively. Well, there are attributes or behaviors that introverts demonstrate that make them good influencers. Listening is a really core part of that. There's things like being genuine, humble, knowledgeable, authentic, personable. Please keep these coming. These are really great. I'll give a few more seconds. I like this one, present things thoroughly and strategically. Now, there's a good one here that I love. Smile, be friendly, and willing to listen. And I think this one is really important, because sometimes when we work, especially at work, we are very serious. And when we engage in influencing activities, we tend to take it seriously. Introducing some humor, I call it sprinkling a touch of humor and good positive energy, could actually calm people down and make them hear what you're trying to talk about. Okay, so great insights. If you haven't checked out the comment section, there is a lot of insights there. So the reason I'm doing this activity is because I want everybody to see the attributes that good influencers have, right? Now that we all know there's about, I think there's more than 90-something people in this room, everybody from different parts of Canada sharing their perspective. Now, if we go to the next slide, I have a question. And this is kind of a question I think you can respond to on the chat as well. If we know these characteristics of influencing, what prevents people from successfully influencing others in a specific situation? Or what could prevent you from influencing people? I love the first one that popped up there, self-doubt in the moment. Conflicting priorities, blaming, which is huge most of the time. So give that another 1 minute. Power imbalance is something that comes up all the time. And I am going to move into the presentation and talk about power and the implications that it has on influencing. But keep putting those comments. The reason this is important is, in many cases, these things that prevent us actually are important to us and also to different people who are involved in that influencing situation, that specific influencing situation. You hear me use the word specific because this goes back to one of the outcomes that we're trying to accomplish for this session. Every influencing situation is different. You need to do that work to analyze it and assign prioritization in terms of how important it is. Okay, so thank you everybody for sharing your comments on that. I can see a lot here. The one on imposter syndrome as well is huge. So if we go to the next slide, I want to use this opportunity to just talk about a few things. For my presentation, I want to talk about what influencing without authority means and tie it back to the two questions that I had asked earlier. The second is I want to also unpack the model and the tools and the strategies. So if we go to the next slide, when we define influencing without authority, we want to make sure that we understand that there's a reason why we should learn about how to influence people without authority, especially when you are in a position of authority. I'm going to show you a diagram about the sources of power later on. And some of the best influencing approaches or tactics research has shown are not the ones that people who are not in positions of authority uses, right? Because many times if you're a leader or you have a position of authority, we naturally want to use that position of authority, the power that we have to influence people. But research shows that those ones actually can create resistance and questions and create a situation where we're not influencing the person successfully or creating commitment or engagement or adoption of our ideas. However, it doesn't mean it doesn't work. It does, but people feel mandated when they're doing it. But there are other sources of power that can help you influence people very well. So the question for you as a leader is, which sources of power are you using to influence people? And can you change it and get a more transformational impact? The other reason why influencing without authority is important is the quality of the relationship that it creates. When you do it really well, people actually like working with you. If I go back and ask you the same question that I told you earlier about the characteristics of people who are good influencers, if I ask you your perception about those people, many people, it might be the responses that I get usually is that, oh, those people are nice to work with, right? So it does improve the quality of relationship you have. But one of the biggest one is it does improve your personal or your leadership presence or brand in the organization. And also it creates an ethical workplace where people demonstrate and display the right behaviors and not the wrong behaviors like gossiping and triangulation and all the other ones. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, when we talk about influencing without authority, research shows that it refers to the ability for you or I to be able to guide, persuade, create value, or impact the actions and the decisions of other people without having a formal power or control over them or the decisions and actions, right? And so basically, in this context, is basically a neutral term that indicates your capacity to have an effect on another person. And this is really important if we start unpacking it as we would do in the next slide. And one of the questions we get is, doesn't this sound like manipulation? No. If we move to the next slide, you can see the difference between those things, those words that I had highlighted earlier, which is to create value, to guide, and also to help people take action, right? And so those three words are really important in differentiating what influence, persuasion, and manipulation is. I think when it comes to influence and manipulation, intent is really important, right? And that means, what is your intent? If the intent is to create value and guide people, that is important. If it is not, and it's for your personal gain, then that can be perceived as manipulation. So this table just sort of unpacks the difference between those three. And one of the things people say to me, but persuasion and influence are similar. I say, yes, they are connected. And if you think about the applicability from an environmental point of view, influence is more used in the formal environments when you're at work and stuff. And then persuasion is more informal environments, like where you're having conversations with with your social circles that are close to you. Okay, so if we just wanted to give this as part of that definition stage. So if we go to, if we continue to the next slide, there's a few things. When you're guiding and creating value, there's certain things that influencing situation must have. First is a freedom of choice, which means people will choose to follow the suggestions, ideas, and input that you've shared based on maybe certain things, like they respect you, they have an admiration for you, or the logic and evidence that you provided is sound. And no element of force or coercion. It is more you are using sanction behavior that are acceptable for collaboration or persuasion in the environment. Next slide, please. Now, can you influence without authority? Absolutely. You can accomplish this if you use a structured approach along with some tools to facilitate each step. And also if you have a good relationship with the person. The type of relationship you have with the person is really important in the application of the structured approach. So that is why we always stress that it's important to spend time to build strong and valuable relationship with people that creates value for them, not just for yourself. Creating value for other people and the organization actually helps improve the credibility that you have. So if we can go to the next slide, please. There are different models and different structures and different frameworks that you can use. The framework we're suggesting here is a 5-part framework. So the first one is the pause. Pause basically means, the acronym stands for, first, P stands for pausing. Just pause for a bit. Every time you are in a situation that requires influence, take a step back to think about, what do I really want to accomplish in this situation? What is my goal? It is important to set goals, and there are tools you can use For example, we can use, one of the things we do with people that we work with in our course is work with some techniques like the rapid techniques for goal setting or reflection by asking critical questions. The second step is analyze. This one is huge. One of the reasons that people fail to influence successfully is because they don't analyze the context, the environment, the stakeholder, and the power dynamics in that situation. And this is really difficult to do. All the research points to the fact that this is one of the biggest areas that people struggle with. And so we're going to give you 2 tools that you can use in this situation as part of this presentation, but there are many tools. The ones we would focus on is that foundation of influence diagram that helps you analyze the different variables that you need to pay attention to and as part of your analysis. The second is the sources of power diagram that we're going to show you to help you analyze what specific source of power are you using in that situation and how you can change it. And then the U means understand. You know, one of the big things we say is understand the expectations that the other person has for you. Sometimes, like I said, at that point, maybe the person is not ready, so the expectations may look different. S stands for select, which means select the influencing approach and tactics, which we will highlight a few here that you intend to use. And E is also execute and adapt. So you will always find out, going back to what I said earlier, that some of the things that you try may not work. So going back and adapting it based on the information you've gathered is going to be really, really important. So the summary is for the short term, when you're influencing, if there is a conflict, never waste a good conflict. Try to use that as a way to build relationship. And from the long-term goal for you would be to create environments and more experiences where people see you as a valuable colleague at the workplace. So that is a framework. We will now talk about the other components of the framework. So the next slide is that foundation. So if you're analyzing the situation, there are certain things to pay attention to. First is the personality of the person. Second is the type of power or the power dynamic. Third is the persuasion approach that may be suitable for that person. Fourth is your organizational environment. What type of workplace politics? What type of culture do they have? What type of organizational structure? Is it a flat structure or a hierarchical structure? Depending on those environments, those factors, you may be able to influence in a different way. Okay, so these are the factors that you need to pay attention to. What type of person? Is a person an introvert, extrovert, or ambivert? What do they like based on your observation or based on the feedback that you've received from other people who are closer to the individual? Next slide, please. So this is one tool that we usually would share. And the second tool is when it comes to power. This diagram sort of unpacks the types of power that everyone has in an organizational setting. And so as a leader, you may have specific types of power. The ones you can see on the my X and Y axis is totally not correct now, but you can see from this diagram at the bottom are the types of power that everyone has in an organization. So every time you feel powerless, think about what type of power do I have? Now, the ones that are on the bottom actually are the most effective types of power to demonstrate when you're trying to influence in a situation. For example, the one with reverent power is actually pretty powerful. If you have a lot of good relationship with other people across your organization and your social capital is really strong, your chances of influencing people with that type of power in your organization is higher if you do the right things. So if you're thinking about analyzing, the power dynamics, this tool can help you. There are 2 things to think about when you are analyzing the power dynamic. The first one is the sources of power, which is this. The second is the contingencies of power, which is something I really recommend you Google. Those 2 come together to impact the power dynamics in a situation. However, The sources of power is very specific in an influencing situation. So when you're analyzing an influencing situation that may not be working, ask yourself, what source or type of power am I using? And what if I change it? So this tool can help you do that reflection. If we go to the next slide, there's another tool I want to share with you, and which is called the approach or the tactics. Specifically, there are three components of this tactic. When you're influencing people, but at this point, you've thought about those factors, which we've covered in the foundation. You've now thought about the power dynamics. Now, how do you actually go to the person and engage with the person? There are three approaches that tends to work quite well with different people, depending on their personality type or behavioral style. Some people, they like you to be logical and provide data, evidence and structure. So those people prefer a more rational approach when you're dealing with them. Some people want to have that emotional connection. And basically, they want to see what is the emotional appeal? Why should they do this from an emotional perspective? So that emotional connection is really, really important to help them start to align with you in that situation. And then some people want to collaborate with you and work hand in hand with you to do that. So that is basically the head, heart, and hands strategy. So sometimes you may need a blend of both if you're dealing with people who can navigate between those three. But occasionally, you may have to use one or take a few items from the other. So this is, like I said, trying to cover what we cover in a day in 30 minutes. So the biggest rule here is, if you want to influence others, realize that influencing others will work when you influence them the way they want to be influenced, not the way you want to influence them. And it's really hard to find out. And that's why that trial and error is important. The other question is, try to find out what the preferred style is, right? And then how can you prepare yourself for that influencing situation? So I'm just going to pause here because it's 12:31 and look at some of the questions. Jaya had asked a great question here. Can you relate influencing to a co-development or co-creation approach to work? Yes. It seemed in the type of work, humans were naturally social in nature. So basically, if someone feels like they are contributing to the value creation, remember, influence about value creation. If someone feels that they're contributing to that, they are more likely to align with you and then to adopt what you're trying to tell them. So it is absolutely necessary that co-development or co-creation approach is applied in an influencing situation. Another question that I have seen is, how can I find my style? Now, there are many tools that we use. In the class section, we use personality type tool. Personality or psychometric tests is one way, but also you can have a conversation with the person and document their expectation. Document what they would like to see, their needs and requirements, and then that would help them in that situation. So I think at this point, we want to look at some of the Q&A. So I can see some questions here. I'm going to answer. Can I give an example of hands influencing? This is a great question. One example I can give is when you are working on a project. As an example, I am starting this project with a colleague. Before I develop the project plan, I can work with that person to say, here's this project we're working that's going to impact your department. Here's the plan that we have. What do you think about this plan? Is there someone in your department that I have missed? Can you provide me feedback on this project plan? That is a collaboration hands approach because you are actually working with the person hand in hand to create the final output of the project plan. Now, when they give you that feedback, try to incorporate that feedback because sometimes people take the feedback and they walk away without incorporating it. The question I usually say is, if that person gives you a feedback, if you send that project plan to them again, can they see their feedback in that new document or in that new output that you generated? If they can't, then they may not be happy about it. But if they can, it helps them feel they have contributed to the creation of that specific output. I hope that answers that question. Okay, awesome. Another question I see here, there's a lot of questions. I'm trying to take them one after the other. This is a great question. Is influence always ethical just because it is collaborative, or can it still manipulate people into decisions that aren't in their best interest? I guess this is a question where it depends, especially the context. In some cases, I will give an example. If you're a manager that is dealing with a performance management issue, as much as you want to be, you want to collaborate, there's going to be a lot of collaborative elements to it to help the employee identify where they need to develop. But at the same time, like I said, it's the difference between the manipulation piece is around that value creation. There are cases where leaders have worked in the performance management section to provide that feedback, but the individual was not ready to receive that feedback at that time. And later down the road, when they move to another role, or they have time to think about it, they actually have come back to say, that was a feedback that I've received consistently over time. But how you do it is really important. So yes, it can be, like I said, there's a slight difference. Is it your personal goal to do that? Or is it because you're trying to create value maybe for the other individual? Or in this case, in a performance setting for the organization? It's not just about you as the leader trying to get what you want in that situation. I love this one. It feels like there is a baseline emotional intelligence. I just missed this one now. Let me see. It feels like there's a baseline emotional intelligence that an influencer needs to be effective at. Yes, would I agree? Absolutely. One of the key skills that you need to have is emotional intelligence, because influencer is around relationship building. And it's a difficult stuff. Sometimes it's emotional for you and the person because this is the right direction. Evidence may show this is the right direction. But if the person doesn't want to take it, there's not so much you can do. And sometimes that's where in some organizations, there are other mechanisms or structural mechanisms that are put in place to make that happen. So emotional intelligence in how you approach that is really, really a vital skill. Now, there's a last question here, which is, I work in a hierarchical government organization where the context itself feels demoralizing. The leadership makes decisions which aren't in public interest, because it doesn't align with political interest. Now, this is a big topic, I feel, based on the research work that we are seeing. It's centered around the political discussions and political interests right now. Unfortunately, people have strong opinions about political perspective, but influencing at the workplace, especially, should be focused on polarity management when it comes to, especially in the public sector that have those political influences, because polarity management is a skill that organizational leaders and employees need to have. And what does that mean? If I can show you the slide, one of the ways to measure influencing, if your influencing has been successful, is actually, you need to look for three things. One is resistance, the second is compliance, the third is commitment. And commitment shows up in three ways: engagement, alignment, and adoption. And these are three key elements in polarity management. And unfortunately, the way political leaders or the influencing skills that we see these days is something that is creating more issues in our society. So that was the three measurements. So if you want to track is your influencing successful? These are the three things to look at. But like I said, commitment is what we want to aim for. And the way you will know if whether, depending on the situation, it's working, is the engagement needs to be there, the alignment needs to be there, adoption needs to be there. In some cases, one of these three will be stronger. And in some cases, like I said earlier, there might be compliance just because of the structural motivational element that are put in place in that influencing situation. And there's another question around, are these strategies applicable to professional and school admissions interview? I would say it depends. This is one perspective of looking at influencing based on all the research out there. Like I said, there are many techniques, there are many tactics. I totally recommend that you read about these. The key message here is whatever strategy or tactics you're using, there are certain things. One, are you creating value for the person? Two, are we doing it for our self-interest? Or is this, even if the person cannot see it now, remember, success is not immediate, right? Even if they can't see it now, would this create value for the person later down the road or for the community? And of course, the third one is, what is your approach to influencing in that specific situation? And I'm just looking at the questions here. There's this one that I would like to address, and that is around, how do you build credibility and trust when you're trying to influence senior leadership or stakeholders outside your immediate team? I think this is a good one that comes up all the time. Personally, my experience is it depends on how big your organization is. If you're in a small organization between 10 to 500 people, you may have direct access to those senior leaders. So using that hands and rational approach, which is the head, senior leaders like data and facts. So that is really essential for them to be able to make decisions. So using a combination of that, if you're in a small organization, may work. For big organizations that are maybe 1,000 to 15,000, you don't actually have that, the span of control or the levels of proximity between you and the senior leader may be further down the road. So maybe a different approach might work, like doing a business case, which would be an example of a head approach or a rational approach, doing a business case or that shows the cost benefit analysis of those could be some approach, but definitely building relationship is great. If you can reach out to them, let's say in a stampede breakfast party, a volunteering party that they're present, or an event that they're attending, to connect with them so that they can put a face to the name, that is, one element. But these are kind of the things that we discuss in more detail in the course that I was telling you about that is tied to the webinar. So I just want to look at the time, mindful of the time here, just to share that if you're not looking at the chat, a recording of this presentation will be distributed to everyone. So like I said earlier, we're trying to condense something that we usually talk about in 7 hours. So if you do want to listen to this and go through the slides later, you're welcome to do so. At this point, and before we wrap up, I just have one question. If there is one thing that you found valuable for this session, and I know we went through some of the items really fast, what would that be? If you can type it in the chat, that would be great. Awesome. Okay, perfect. Okay, that is great. Now, while you're typing that, I think I just want if the presenter, the moderator can share the screen, the slide deck of the pause. I probably want to ask one question. Which of these elements of the pause model would you have a question on, and what would be that question? I see 3 more questions here. Just if we can show that screen, the pause model on the screen, because we have about 20 minutes, I want to use it to address specific tactics and answer the question. So one of the questions here is, when observing people to try to understand their preferences, what if people are not authentic and what they are expressed are not true, or how to evaluate? This is actually really difficult. That's why we recommend that, sometimes preferences and needs are difficult. People are in a different state. They may not be able to, how can I articulate it? Understand the scope of what they need at that time. And that I don't know what authentic means in this case, but the story I'm making up in my head is what they're expressing may be difficult to evaluate. And so this is where taking that information and executing on it might be the first step. And then if it doesn't work, adapting it and coming back to say, listen, what have we missed? This has happened to me where I thought I captured the feedback, I took the information, we implemented it, and we went back and the person is like, this was not what I wanted, right? And this typically happens all the time. But then that also provides you a platform or an opportunity to have a conversation about, if this is not what you needed or you required, what else can we add to adopt it? Now, sometimes I know we are sometimes working on a tight timeline, but that is an approach I would use. You gather that feedback first, you document it so that the person is able to see that you've documented that feedback, you execute or you implement, and then you gather feedback. And if the feedback does not align with what you received originally, you can bring back that documentation and have a conversation, and then that could create another output that you can use to modify the solution moving forward. And I have another question on any advice on how to tailor this for entrepreneurs who do not have insight into the hierarchy of an organization and may not have connections. How do you even get the first meeting? This is a great one. First, I don't, this is a very interesting one. I don't know the context to which this is, but I would say if you're an entrepreneur, somebody who is an entrepreneur and you want to get insight into the hierarchy of an organization, and maybe you want to make a connection. The first thing I would do is first, of course, doing some research and getting information about the organization and who the leadership is. And then I could connect on LinkedIn. And maybe from following the person on LinkedIn, I could see an event they're attending, a professional event. We don't want to stalk people here. Maybe they're attending, let's say you're targeting somebody in a digital technology company, and they might be attending an event at Platform Calgary that they had shared on their LinkedIn. You could find time to attend that event and share with the person, hey, I've been interested in your company. Can you tell me more about that, right? And so you're actually genuinely interested in learning about the company because you, as an entrepreneur, you feel that the solution you're providing to the company would be useful. That is where the value creation comes, right? And if the person may be interested at that time, they may not be, but that is not a problem because, like I said earlier, the outcomes may not be immediate, but you've already used that platform to establish a relationship. Next time when you comment on that person's profile on LinkedIn, they can put a face to the name. Or next time when they have a problem that requires your solution as an entrepreneur to solve it, they can reach out to you because you've built that connection. I usually say the quality, the connection you build with people that helps you influence them in situation doesn't actually happen at that time that you need to influence them. It should be built way before you need that influencing situation. You need it in influencing situation. So being nice to people when you don't have anything to gain from them is actually a useful skill because it can help you build relationship to influence them at a later stage. Awesome. I have two more questions here. Someone said, I had difficulty building relationship at the workplace and influencing manager. What are some things that I can do to build effective relationship? Now, this is a question that I had this question the last time I did this course, and it came from an introvert. Now, I don't know who this individual is, but the story I'm making up in my head is, you might want to look at some techniques that introverts, there are some specific techniques that are powerful that both introverts and extroverts use to influence. There is sometimes people say, oh, I'm an introvert, so I can't influence. No, there are specific techniques and behaviors that both introvert and extrovert use that are really effective in influencing and building relationship with others. So for this question, the answer I might give is, if you can do so, there's ChatGPT to help, but if you type in a prompt around, what are some behaviors or techniques that introverts or extroverts use to influence that are powerful, the answer will blow your mind. I actually have done this before because of the question, and it's something that I would recommend in this situation. Now, there is a great question here. Someone said, is pause too slow for fast real-time decisions? Will something like OODA means observe, orient, decide, and act loop be better for high pressure situation? I really love, this is a great tool. And I agree with you. So this comes to another element of influencing, which is if you're the one influencing, there needs to be an element of decisiveness. And if this framework is too slow for you, there are other framework that might be suitable. For example, when I am faced with decisive decisions, I use a framework called RAPID. What do I need from the person? Do I need input? Do I need RAPID stands for, I think, recommend, advise, accountable, perform, input, and perform. Perform is the P. So do I need input from them? Do I need advice from them? Do I need them to make a recommendation for me? Do I need them to act on the information that I'm doing? And that helps me, that helps me decide what I need, and then I can be more specific with what I'm looking for, because that is a decision that requires decisiveness at that time. And by the way, there's a difference between decisiveness and regular decision making. That is another conversation on its own. But to that person who raised that question, it depends. You can use different tools depending on the nature of the situation you're facing. And one last question I want to address here, that is where I was hoping to wrap up with, is there is a cultural element in influencing. One of the reasons I'm passionate about influencing, and the reason why I started researching about influencing, is actually because I'm somebody who has lived in 4 continents, worked with people from more than 117 countries, and also more than 300 cultures. And one of the things I've realized is the cultural dimension is really, really important. And there is an element of power dynamics. The way people see power in Canada and in Finland is totally different. If you go to an organization, like I say in Finland, I can see the prime minister at a restaurant, and I can go to the prime minister and say, hey, can I talk to you? And you can talk to them. In Canada, I don't think it's the same. Even having access to the premier of a province is so difficult, but that's kind of a power dynamic, and how you influence in that situation is different. So if you're leading a multicultural team, or you're working in a multicultural team, or you're in an environment where there's multicultural attributes, really, really paying attention on the cultural dimension and influences can be really important. But if you're doing that, one of the things we tend to do, everybody, including myself, we may sometimes stereotype, and that is normal, but try to think about other aspects, because sometimes people may be from one cultural dimension, but they may have been influenced by many cultural dimensions. So you may have somebody who is, who is born in Canada, but the parents might be from Mexico and experience a Mexican cultural dimension in your family, or somebody from Nigeria who has lived in Finland and also has lived in Canada, who is influenced by those three cultural dimensions. The way they want to be influenced would look very, very different.